Lillian Inn, bar number 126353.
And Madeline Loeb, spelled Loeb, bar number 173970.
Okay, and for defense?
Good afternoon, Your Honor. Chris Weinmiller with Ms. Brophy. Weinmiller is W-I-N-E-M-I-L-L-E-R, and my bar number is 863177. And Lisa Maxfield for Ms. Brophy. My bar number is 844337, and my last name is spelled M-A-X-F-I-E-L-D.
And before we took the lunch break, there was a question regarding an exhibit. I did tell the sides what my proposed changes were, and I asked if either side wanted me to repeat it. Neither side did, but it's my understanding there's some discrepancy in what the sides heard my order to be. Is that
Yeah,
fair?
Your Honor, I think I'm just going to provide the court with our objections, and I've just put them in red.
Okay.
But we still end up with location of offense and fraud and suspect and other words that are inflammatory, concerning, and irrelevant, at least in this case.
All right, so it sounds to me like what we're really talking about now is these are different, clearly, than what we talked about before, but I also realize that when defense gets an exhibit and is trying to read through it quickly, not to say they didn't have it, but in the context of what occurred in the courtroom, it was all fairly quick. So I want to ask the state this. I'm just going to ask the state this question, and I realize it will require us to take a break. Well, first of all, let me ask defense, what is the objection to the heading investigation report when this person has testified that they're an investigator, or was at the time?
So it seems to me that the whole point of the exhibit is to establish a loss amount that the state wants to use in their case. Everything else that is in there is irrelevant. We wouldn't let a police officer's report come in, even the front page. It's hearsay, and the various comments that treats it as though this is some sort of a criminal investigation, unresolved, I might add, that ought to be to bleed into this murder case. It's prejudicial. It's another bad act. It's unnecessary.
All right, so a number of objections. Let me ask you, and I was just asking about the phrase investigation report. Let me also ask then about the phrase AKA, Nancy Brophy, AKA Nancy Crampton-Brophy. Is there something about the AKA that's particularly, well, that has a different grounds for objection, I would guess?
That was Ms. Weinmiller's circle, and she said that her problem with that is that it's only used in a criminal context.
Okay. Now I'm going to ask the state a question, and I haven't ruled on anything yet. So I'm asking the state, well, actually, let me ask defense this question first. I'm not telegraphing a ruling, I'm just asking a question. So do you have a copy of this too?
No, in fact, the reason I wasn't following the court as well as I should have is you had the only copy.
We're going to make a copy so we can all follow along. And do you have a copy of the marked up one?
No, we've never seen that.
Okay, then let's make two copies and we'll make sure everybody has it.
That old chief?
I think so. Mm-hmm. Oh, Andy.
And I will say, while we're sorting through this, I certainly don't mean to have if I mispronounce it, I'm sorry, Miss Aiken? You don't need to sit on the stand while we're going through all this. If you want to put your mask on and have a seat elsewhere, you can. If you want to stay there, that's fine too. But I don't want you to feel like you have to stay there.
It's okay.
Okay. All right.
The copy does not show the highlighting.
That's fine. It's already marked in red too. So I guess I'm asking defense this question first because you've listed a number of bases for objection. What I'm about to say might satisfy some but not others, but I'm just going to ask the question. And on the heading, if the word investigation was removed and it just said report, and the word, or not word, but the AKA were removed, and the word suspect was removed. The word fraud was removed under safe fraud case number. And then when we get down to what says location of offense, if that just read location, and we eliminate the word victim, does defense still have an objection to this document?
No.
I ask, before you say no too quickly, I see it's circled Multnomah and Washington County, but I gathering that the reason that's circled, but I don't want to put words in your mouth, was because as it pertained to the phrase location of offense, that was the problem?
It was, Your Honor.
All right, now I want to ask the state. Does the state believe any of that? I mean, whether or not you agree with their bases for objections, does the state object to taking any of those words out? And I can repeat it if need be.
I don't think we have I mean, the investigation seems a bit ridiculous because this is an investigation report. She testified to that. That's what Alderson Such testified to. I think it's sort of taking away from what this is. But the rest of it, we don't have an issue with at all, though I will ask you to just double check those to make sure we've got it right.
Okay, so the other ones were elimination of the word suspect, which is currently bolded, and I'm trying to go from top of the page down. Then the next is the AKA.
Just that, right? Just AKA.
The AKA. And we drop to about midway on the page. It currently says safe fraud case number. It would just say safe case number. We'd take out the word fraud. When we get down to location of offense, we would take out the words of offense. It would just say location. And then we'd completely eliminate the word victim.
Got it.
And so what I'm going to do, so now I'm going to give my ruling and I'll explain why. I'm also going to require the state to take out the word investigation. Part of the defense objection, if I understood it, was cumulative in that the witness had already testified to most of this information. So with regards to it being an investigation report, I think she's already described what her role was in this, and I'll ask that you remove that word too. With that said, I realize it may take a few more minutes to make these kinds of corrections, and I'm not trying to pressure you. I'm just asking so I have sort of a realistic time frame. How long do you think it would take?
We will try and do it in 5 or 10 minutes. I can tell you we have spent a lot of time over the lunch hour dealing with this because it is a bit complicated, but we'll try and do it now.
Okay, and that's fine. Again, you know, we've got extra time. If the case goes into tomorrow, it goes into tomorrow. But let's take a break and just let us know when you're ready. I guess it does beg the question. Well, I'm not going to ask the question. All right, let's take a break. We'll be in recess.
We'll go off record. I will meet WebEx and we will be in recess.
All rise.
All right, please be seated. And we are ready to continue with the witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. At this time, I'd re-offer State's Exhibit 83.
All right.
Objection.
All right, so 83 is admitted.
And that's all the questions I have.
Oh, okay. Cross-examination.
Just a couple. Ms. Aiken, did you receive a subpoena just from our office served on March 23rd, 2022?
Yes.
And that subpoena asked you to bring, or actually commanded you to bring email, audio recordings, and notes? Did you bring those?
I have not brought any additional information that hasn't already been submitted to the defense.
I'm just asking whether you brought the records that we subpoenaed.
I haven't brought any additional records.
Okay, so you would only provide records to the prosecution, you wouldn't provide them pursuant to our subpoena?
No, I would definitely supply anything that.
Objection, Your Honor. Relevance, and I mean, I have a question in aid of objection.
All right, why don't we have the jury step out for just a minute? All right, so let me ask Ms. Maxfield, and everyone can have a seat. I haven't seen a motion to compel or anything that would allow the court to know this was going to be an issue. Where is defense going with this?
Yeah, I'm just biased. I went to talk to the witness about this at the break to see whether any documents have been provided. She told me that she didn't think that she should talk to me, and apparently is unwilling to talk to me, so I thought I'd ask her about it on the witness stand, but it does go to bias. I mean, if she's
All
only
right.
gonna give records to one service of subpoena and not to the defense subpoena.
All right, so your initial objection was relevance, although you wanted to ask a question in aid of an objection. Do you want to ask that question too?
Well, yes, and it goes to the point Ms. Maxwell just brought up. There's an attorney for SAFE that everything has to go through. We have had to go through the attorney in order to contact anyone or make any requests of SAFE. Defense has subpoenaed SAFE and had been directed to go through their lawyer. And so I'm assuming, and I can ask Ms. Aiken, are you the one that has any responsibility, or do you receive subpoenas, or does that all go through your SAFE attorney?
It all went through the legal department.
Okay.
Your Honor, we have not had any contact from the legal department, nor was there any direction that we were supposed to go through another abracadabra route. We served a subpoena.
Okay, here's what we're going to do. I'll allow the questions to be asked. You can answer them however you wish, and you can address the attorney issue on redirect if you wish. But as far as the relevance objection, I could see potential relevance. It's a low standard with regard to bias. So let's bring the jury back in.
And would you like me to go off record?
Yeah.
Okay. I will go off record to meet the WebEx, and I will go get the jury.
Be seated. Ms. Maxfield, you can continue.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Aiken, I had asked you whether you had been served with a subpoena on March 23rd of 2022 by the defense.
Yes, I received that from our legal department.
Okay, and that subpoena commanded you to provide email, audio recordings, along with notes in your file, is that right?
The subpoena, I have supplied the notes and anything that was in the claim file at the time I put my case together back in 2018.
And that was produced pursuant to a prosecution request for those documents, is that right?
That was voluntary on SAFE's part when I submitted the information to the DA's office.
And so it's, you're saying your lawyer told you that you didn't need to do anything more?
No, I did not say that.
Did somebody over there tell you you didn't need to do anything more?
No,
Okay, you just didn't do anything more?
I didn't know I needed to supply additional information as to what was already submitted.
Okay, I have no further questions, thank you.
Redirect.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Aiken, do any subpoenas or legal documents that are sent to your company go through your legal department?
Yes,
And do you also have a publicly available public records request department?
yes,
And to the best of your knowledge, has everything that you generated, notes, any information related to this case been provided?
yes. Can I touch
Continue.
on something?
Yes.
The defense had indicated that I wasn't willing to speak. That was when Mr. Overstreet was only in here and I was sitting up here, and I asked, am I supposed to be answering? Because she was asking me questions. And I said, am I supposed to be answering? And, okay,
For just a minute. I'm going to ask, so I don't think this is responsive to the question you asked, so I'm going to ask the jury to disregard the last answer that was given.
Thank you. I don't have any other questions.
okay.
All right. May the witness be excused.
Yes.
And for defense?
Yes.
All right. You can go ahead and step down. All right. Ms.
And the
Herman.
state will call Robert Azor.
Robert Hayes, okay.
Trying to move away so you have some space. No.
All right, Mr. Azor, we'll have you come up here to the witness box. And if you can step into it and get close to the microphone, but stay standing for just a moment, my clerk will give you an oath.
Okay. Under the penalty of perjury, do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Then you may be seated and you may remove your mask. And because we're being recorded, I'll just ask you to please state and spell your first and last name.
Robert Azor, Robert Azorr.
All right, and Mr. Azor, there is water there if you want,
Thank you.
but whenever the state's ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Mr. Azor. How are you currently employed?
I'm a police investigative accountant for Portland Police Bureau, the Narcotics and Organized Crime Unit, formerly the Drugs and Vice Division.
And are you a sworn police officer or is that a civilian position?
I'm a civilian,
And how long have you worked with Portland Police?
31 years.
And did you have any particular training or educational background for your position, or how did that start?
I have a Bachelor of Science in Business. I have a Bachelor of Science in Economics. I have a Master's in Business Administration and Finance from the University of Oregon. And my first job out of grad school was at a bank in Los Angeles called Security Pacific National Bank, where I was a commercial loan officer. I've worked various jobs until like Tektronix. I worked as a financial analyst. In 1988, Mike Schrunk hired me to be the financial investigator for the Regional Organized Crime and Narcotics Task Force. I worked in that capacity for 3 years. Then the opening for the financial investigator position at Portland Police opened up, and I took that since 1991. During the scope of my term of my employment, I had the opportunity to actually teach some classes for the FBI, mostly on net worth analysis, source and application of funds, kind of a fancy way of determining ill-gotten gains. If you were an IRS agent, it would be the formulas used for determining taxable income. And I've taken classes on tracing funds, follow the money. And the rest has just been me doing the job.
And so what does your job entail, generally speaking?
Generally speaking, I investigate money laundering investigations, both state and federal. We have some federal law enforcement in our unit. I've assisted with human trafficking cases. I mostly work narcotics cases, looking for ill-gotten gains proceeds. And I run the asset forfeiture program, which is state and federal. It's a program that allows law enforcement to seize the assets that are the instrumentalities or profits and proceeds of crime and forfeit that money. I've worked in a public corruption case once, an embezzlement case of a fire chief. I've done a variety of cases, but mostly narcotics and mostly civil forfeiture and criminal forfeiture.
And so it sounds like, are there times then when detectives of particular investigations that aren't related to what you typically do will come to you and ask for assistance on their investigation?
Yeah, quite often I get requests from detective division on theft cases, human trafficking, any crimes where money is an element, or the tracing of funds or expenditures, or the nature of the finances might be a motivating factor in a crime.
All right. And so is part of your responsibility then, are you provided with records by the investigator or someone on the case, and then you review those?
Yes.
All right. And does the type of records that you're provided, does that vary wildly?
Yes.
Depending on what you're doing?
Sure. Everything from cryptocurrency to it could be receipts for the purchase of a yacht or a boat or a car. It could, a variety of things. Most likely it's bank accounts. Sometimes it's income taxes. Sometimes it's from a grand jury subpoena, and sometimes it's seized from a search warrant.
All right. And moving to this specific case, were you asked by Detectives Merrill and Posey to assist in this homicide investigation?
Yes, I was.
All right. And did they provide you at some point with a series of records?
Yes, they did.
Okay, a variety of different accounts and so forth?
Yes.
Okay. And before we talk about those, did you create some documents? And I'm going to hand up to you a stack of them. We'll start first with State's Exhibit 108. Specifically looking at State's Exhibit 108, did you create the 3 pages in this exhibit?
Yes, I did.
All right. And as we'll talk about each page as we go through it. So looking specifically at page 1 as a guide, what are the records that you were provided to review in totality?
I reviewed bank accounts from Onpoint Community Credit Union, Wells Fargo Bank, and Bank of America. In total, there were 6 accounts. Out of those 6 accounts, 2 were credit or loan accounts. 1 was actually a Visa, 1 was a home loan. The remaining 4 were what I would classify as regular bank accounts. Do you want me to go into this
Yep.
summary in more detail?
Yes, please.
Okay.
And so maybe if you can talk about like each company, so Onpoint, Wells
Sure.
Fargo, Bank of America, and then within those, what accounts you're looking at.
Okay, I wanted to let you know the scope. The scope of the records was June of 2016 to approximately September of 2018. Those are the records I looked at.
Okay, so and is that the same period for all these records?
Yes.
Okay.
The Onpoint bank accounts, the first one I looked at was a joint bank account 741660. One of the things you need to know about this account, if you've ever had a credit union account, you can have a checking and a savings. And in this case, Onpoint provided them with 4 sub-accounts. You know, lots of times it's a suffix. It could be a -01 would be your checking, -02 would be savings, that kind of thing. They had 4 sub-accounts on this. 2 were mainly used. The suffix -09 was interest checking. That was by far the most used account. And then later on, I'll be discussing it, the use of -03, which is market rate savings account. What I did was I went through all 6 of these accounts, looked at everything, and generated this as a summary of the activity in each of these to allow me to then focus my investigation. So I'll go over what I found on each of these.
All right, thank you.
The joint account is mostly used by Nancy Crampton-Brophy. The deposits to that account were various insurance commission checks that Nancy received, her Social Security, and there were a couple life insurance loan checks that went in there. And in October, a retirement draw that went in there. The expenses that came out of the account were varied, much of it normal. One of the things that does not come out of this account, I found, were most household utilities do not come out of this account. Daniel had a Wells Fargo checking account, and he tended to pay for all of the utilities on the home. But what did come out, there were some mortgage payments that came out, insurance payments for 6 different life insurance accounts, some food, like it would be like Fred Meyer, so forth, restaurants, Starbucks, entertainment like movies, retail, gas, some travel, PayPal, a lot of debit purchases. There were some checks that came out of this account, real small ones, that went to the other Onpoint account, which I'll talk about in a second. It's the Estrada Agency Fund. It's real small, like $100 to $200 checks. And there were larger checks that Nancy wrote to Daniel that went into his Wells Fargo account. And I'll talk about those later. But those checks that went to Daniel were typically to make house payments. So that's kind of the summary of what was going on to that account. I did observe a few transactions in there. With all of these, I was looking to all of these accounts with an eye to financial health, whether they were meeting their obligations, whether they were having distress with their finances, whether they were behind, what their financial behavior was. The other thing I was looking for was specific transactions that might have evidentiary value. Some of those I just looked at myself based upon knowing what the crime is, and some Through the prosecution group, I was giving dates and amounts that I would look for specific transactions. And I did find in this account items that had evidentiary value.
Okay, and we'll talk about those in a bit.
Sure.
And so just to be clear, we've been talking about the Onpoint joint account 741660 that then has all the sub accounts that you were talking
Right,
about.
right.
And
Correct.
we'll put States Exhibit 108 up on the screen so that you can see it in front of you as well. It'll be right in front of you on the little one.
Okay,
So you
thanks.
have the paper copy. All right. So
Okay,
then also at Onpoint.
okay. Also at Onpoint, there was a Estrada agency. The signers were Nancy Crampton-Brophy and Susan Estrada. I don't know why the account was set up, what the nature of it was. It could have been, it seems like a business account. For the first couple of months that I looked at, there were some insurance commission deposits. And then later on, there was hardly any deposits. Most of the deposits were small checks from the other Onpoint account. And the expenses out of the account was primarily 2 insurance premiums came out of that account every month. Very low activity and low balances, kind of unremarkable. I do mention here that at a point in July of 2018, there was a large check that went through this account that was a secondary withdrawal from Daniel's retirement fund.
Okay.
Okay, moving on to Wells Fargo. The rest of these accounts are going to be Daniel's accounts. So the 2 I've talked to you about are the ones, one was a joint account with the very first one with Daniel and Nancy. The second one was Susan Estrada and Nancy. It was kind of unremarkable. Daniel had a checking account at Wells Fargo and he had a home mortgage at Wells Fargo. His checking account consisted of deposits from Pioneer Pacific College, which I believe is the Culinary Institute job. And he deposited checks from Avamere. And then he received miscellaneous checks from that first Onpoint account from Nancy. The expenses, he made Wells Fargo mortgage payments. He paid the household monthly utility payments every month via check. Had some large payments to a Sears and the Bank of America Visa, which I'm going to be talking about in a couple minutes. By large, I mean there were many, many, many months when it would be like $800 to the Visa and $1,000 to Sears. And I don't know what the nature of the debt was at Sears.
And let me just ask you that before I forget, not to interrupt you. Is that a record or an account you didn't have access to?
No, I did not have access to that.
All right, continue.
Okay, so that was Daniel's kind of, his payroll. The first one was the income from Nancy on the Onpoint. This is Daniel's income and household expenses. The mortgage was in Daniel's name. It was a Wells Fargo home mortgage. When I reviewed that, I did see a lot of months where there was loan delinquency, late payments, sometimes by 2 or 3, even 4 months, and it seemed to be persistent. That account had issues with that until October of 2017. And in October of 2017, they withdrew $35,000 from a retirement account. After that point, there was no more loan delinquencies. Bank of America, moving on. There's 2 accounts at Bank of America. Daniel had an account called Odonata Consulting, or I think it's Food Consulting actually. It was a business checking account. I was able to observe ATM check deposits every month, like there'd be 2, 3, 4. The records did not include what those checks were. So I don't know what they were. The expenses that came out were almost all food related, like he was providing some sort of food kind of service or business. Often the same places, Pumpkin Patch, Winco, Uma Jamaya, I think is Asian food market, Fred Meyer, almost all food purchases, food related. And I put there, the account may have been used for a chef or a catering type business. I don't know what he used it for. This account was also kind of unremarkable. Relatively low balances, tend to use most of what went in, may have had at the end of the month, maybe $1,000 in the account. The other Bank of America account was a Bank Americard or a Visa. At the start of my investigation in June of 2016, it had a balance of $11,000, paid 14% interest. I don't know the source of what was charged to get that up to $11,000. After June, there were monthly charges, miscellaneous charges to the Visa that might be like for tires at Les Schwab. At one point, there was a charge for Southwest Air tickets, maybe even for Starbucks or something small. And then those eventually in 2017, most of those charges stopped and there was just payments at that point. At the date of death on June 2nd, the balance was down to $3,500.
All right, and so you've reviewed all the records from these, I'm gonna call them 6 accounts, 3 bank financial institutions, 6 accounts. After going through all of these records and sort of summarizing to yourself as you're reviewing them, looking for the things that you've talked about, did you narrow your focus down to specific accounts, fewer accounts than these 6?
Yes, I do. I did. I decided to focus on the Onpoint joint account because of what I saw in it. I saw some evidentiary transactions. And I also did see some signs of distress in that account in the form of NSFs, which is insufficient funds or returned items. And the fact that it was mainly controlled by the defendant. So it made sense to focus on that. The other focus, because of the loan delinquencies, was the Wells Fargo mortgage.
And so on this first page of State's Exhibit 108, those 2 accounts are delineated by the blue focus box?
Yes.
All right. Okay. And so looking at those 2 accounts in particular, did you create, I'm going to call it a chart, really a spreadsheet, that is page 2 of State's Exhibit 108?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And so what is this illustrating? Is this kind of illustrating financial health? What does this look like?
It was intended to take the 2 accounts that I focused on and to depict them chronologically from June 2016 through September. So it would kind of tell a story. And then I picked the statement data. For instance, the data that was concerning on the Wells Fargo loan was past due amounts on the statement. So I scheduled all those out over time. Can I stand up and point to this?
Yes.
Is there? Oh,
There's a pointer right
pointer
there,
here.
and what would be helpful is if you can first sort of, as you're going through, explain both what the color columns are, and then any abbreviations. I think
Okay.
you explained NSF already.
Okay. I'll give an overview of what everything is, and then we'll start going through it so you're not confused. This is the Wells Fargo home payments. These are past due amounts. They do not include the current month due. So if you owe $1,500 this month, that would be on top of the past due amounts. And you can see that the past due amounts, this is what I saw when I first went through, was persistent until the time that they take out this retirement. This is life insurance premiums paid, life insurance premiums paid out of bank accounts. I intend to talk to this at the end after I talk about the other items. This pertains to financial behavior, discretionary and non-discretionary income, how you choose to pay off your bills and what you choose to pay and what you don't choose to pay. So I'm going to talk about this at the end, okay? This is the Onpoint account, the very first one where Nancy gets her social security and gets her insurance commissions. And what I listed here was the statement ending balance through time. So you can kind of see what the balance was doing on the account. And this is an item of how many returned or NSFs for that month. This, at the very start, I talked to you, when I was talking to you about the Onpoint account having sub-accounts, this is actually sub-account -03, the market savings. So there's a checking account in Nancy's Onpoint account, and there's a savings account. At a certain point, she uses that account, and that's when the retirement funds are taken out in October. So I'll talk about that in a minute also. So this is just a sub-account with Onpoint. It's a savings account. This over here are financial activities that are kind of note that happen through time. And I'll be referring to those also. So to start with,
Let me ask you 2 questions before you start.
Sure.
Sorry to interrupt you. One, can you explain what returned items or NSF are?
returned items or NSF is when, let's say you write a check and there's insufficient funds in your account. Depending on your relationship with the bank, they might charge an NSF, a non-sufficient fund fee, and hold it and then pay it anyway. So it might be like a temporary overdraft, if that makes sense. And a returned item is when we tried it, it's not working, I'm sending the check back to you. So you actually get the check back.
All right.
So it's basically a point where you have insufficient funds.
Okay, thank you. And go ahead and walk us through what we're seeing on this chart.
Okay, I wanted to talk about explain the Wells Fargo past due first. And I believe I have a exhibit of one of the statements so I can kind of show you. I want you to see where these numbers came from so that, you know, I'm just not pulling them out of air.
Yep.
So
So let's look at States Exhibit 85A. And you have a copy up there in front of you too. In that stack I gave you.
okay, so this is the Wells Fargo statement you look at. First of all, you look at the date and then you look at the name and there's the account number. And then if you scroll up, it'll say, okay, you can stop. The current payment, the overdue amount, if there's going to be a late charge, and the total payment due by. So in this case, I think this might have been, what was this, September 2017 or? Okay, so the amount due is going to be around $8,000 past due. And I don't know what Wells Fargo's policy is, but when I worked for the bank, when you were 4 months past due, you were flirting with foreclosure, them starting foreclosure. So it's kind of serious. So I just wanted you to see, and then if you scroll down to, is there a second page here?
That's correct.
It actually tells right there, these are the ones that haven't been paid and how many days delinquent. So those are the things I went through when I comprised that first column. And this is to show basically that I'm seeing financial distress. They're not being able to make their house payment, okay? It's a long-winded way of saying they're having problems.
And so when you're creating this yellow/gold column, you are looking at not just 85A, but multiple different pages.
A statement for each.
Okay.
I go through each month statement.
All right, and States Exhibit 85A is an example of one of the statements you look at to get this information to put into your chart.
Right.
All right.
The next thing I want to focus on is the Onpoint account, and I just wanted to give an example of what what I looked at on a statement for an overdraft.
All right, and so so in column, the left column or the first column of the blue columns.
This one,
Those
that's the ending balance on the statement for that month.
All right, and so if we look at States Exhibit 86A.
Okay, this is just, I'm just trying to give an example of where my data comes from. Okay, so I'm looking at the Onpoint statement. You can see it's that interest checking. It's the suffix 09 that I kind of told you about. These are typical expenditures. If it's negative, it's an expenditure. If it's positive, it's a deposit. So here's a paid item. So that'd just be an overdraft fee of $30. And here's a returned item. I think that was, they were probably paying a life insurance and it got checked and it got returned. If you scroll down, they actually give a summary at the end of the statement. Keep going. Right here, I highlighted that for you, and that's year to date. So the purpose of me showing that, if we go back to the, is just that this information here supports what's going on here. So I'm just trying to put together that they're having problems with NSFs, they're having problems making their house payment. And then to add to that, there's one more thing. They took out 2 Foresters life insurance loans. And I traced both of those loans to make a Wells Fargo house payment.
And we've heard a little bit about that. Let's look at States Exhibit 73A. All right, and so we'll go kind of, the first 2 pages of this exhibit appear to be part of the Foresters documents. Just scroll down a little bit. And so what are we seeing here?
I wanted to explain the way I got to that Foresters document, because I also had the life insurance documents, so the subpoenaed, is that I saw the deposit, the $3,500 deposit, and I traced it back to, it was a Foresters check. So then I went and looked at the Foresters life insurance documents and found the dispersal of the loan to them. So I kind of traced it backwards. So this is where it went in. They got the Foresters check for $3,500. It goes in here. It's another check's with it. And then you can scroll down. Lots of Starbucks going on there. And here's a check that went to the, there was actually a check that she wrote to him, and then he made the deposit. Looks like 2 months worth for the Wells Fargo home loan.
Okay, and then if we scroll down to the last page, are you then tracing that payment into the mortgage?
Yes, yeah, I just completing the, right here, that's where it is.
And so is this part of an example sort of what you're doing as you're going through, you're seeing a deposit of a certain amount in one account, and then you're tracing it through, in this case, the life insurance documents, and then back to the mortgage account?
Yeah, it started with me wanting to know, where's that money coming from? What's this for? Was it a commission check? What, was it income? What was it? So that's how I got to this. And the only reason this is significant, if we go back to the original, the colored, I have it listed up here. And then there's another one. They took two checks out totaling $2,090 in May of 2017 and sent another check to Wells Fargo. So these 2 loans, these NSFs, and the past due, they're just basically all telling the same story. They're having to borrow money to make the house payment. They're having issues in their checking account with some NSFs, and then they're not catching up too much. Okay.
And so to be clear, if we look at that very first line in this chart, which is June 2016, just to make sure that we're reading this right, it looks like there's 1 payment past due in the mortgage, there's 5 either returned items or NSFs, and then the money is borrowed from Foresters, which then leads us into now a period following that of no returned items or NSFs. And is that sort of the pattern you're seeing as you see some of this borrowed money?
Well, yes, it is the pattern that you're seeing. And the reason there's this line right here is because you're going to see a different story down here than is up here. the finances actually lend themselves to a story of June 2016 through September 2017, and then a different story from October 2017 through to the end.
All right, so what we're sort of looking at, delineated by the lines, is a period. Well, it looks like there's two lines, so let's talk about those just briefly. So one line comes right after September 2017, and so is that splitting?
That's just a year line. These are just years.
Oh, okay.
That's
Oh
26.
no, sorry, I'm talking about the thin line that's September 2000, splitting September 2017 from October 2017. Yes.
Yeah, this is the line where the past due or the delinquencies stop, and it's kind of, and they decide to borrow $35,000 from Daniel's Pioneer Pacific 401k retirement fund to catch that up and pay it off.
Okay, so this first period that we've been talking about is really from June 2016 to roughly the end of September 2017.
Correct, exactly.
Okay. And so in this time period, as you're going through all of this and looking at this chart, what are you noticing about, or what observations are you making about spending habits and things like that, in addition to sort of these delinquencies in the mortgage account and these NSFs and return items?
What I noticed that I thought for me was unusual, maybe it's not, that I didn't see any change in spending habits. I didn't see an attempt to lower non-essential expenses to meet obligations. I just saw spending, and one example of that is they did the Florida trip, and I think it might have been a cruise. I don't know if it was a cruise because they paid for a Royal Caribbean. I think I actually I showed a picture of that check in the middle of this. So they got all this going on and some of this going on, but they're taking a trip. So what I'm basically saying is the expenditure behavior did not change during this period. It was still Starbucks every day or most days. Still sometimes going out to dinner, going for sushi on a normal basis. So I didn't see a change in behavior.
And that stood out to you as you're looking through this
Well, sure.
period of time?
Yes, it did.
And I think you mentioned you have an entry there, so we're just kind of covering some of the entries for the Florida trip. And if we look at States Exhibit 86B, is this just showing a payment for that trip?
Right. This is just showing expenditure behavior. So it just shows that they were taking a trip, that they made it. It's pretty large. It's almost $1,200 in January of 2017, and then I think they took the trip in February. So it's just demonstrating what I just said, that I just didn't see any change in purchasing behavior.
And similar to what we talked about in one of the prior exhibits, this is what you're looking at as you go through these. You're noticing something like this exhibit, then you're going back through, looking at what that is, and then kind of putting it into the chart that we've been talking about in States Exhibit 108.
Right.
All right. Okay. In looking through this time period from, and again, we'll call it just following that line, June 2016 to September of 2017, what is your note or impression of the financial health of their accounts or of the Brophies during this time period?
Well, I think it speaks for itself. I'm not allowed to give my opinion, am I?
Well, yes, as an expert in what you do, what is
Okay.
your opinion looking at
Well,
the
obviously
accounts?
they're under financial distress. Okay, payments being 1, 2, and 3 months behind, and then maybe they'd catch up briefly, and then it would repeat. It was a persistent problem that it looked like to me it plagued them with staying up on their obligations. It was a real problem. Now, in terms of dynamics between them, I have no idea what they were thinking at the time, but I think it's pretty self-evident that they're having issues up to here. And something had to happen here because of what I said about there, you could get into a possible foreclosure situation when you get that far behind. So they either needed to borrow money from a relative, change, sell something, sell a car, do something to come up and cure this. And I actually, what led up to this, do I have a slide on what led up to this? What happened in September of 2017? Well, they decided to withdraw $35,000, and I think it was in form of a loan from Daniel's 401k through his work.
Yep, and we'll look at States Exhibit 86C. C as in cat.
Okay, so here's the draw, the loan, the $35,000. You go ahead and scroll up. This gets deposited into the Onpoint account. So you can go ahead and scroll up. Right there. Here's where it goes in, October 1st. And then like a couple days later, if you scroll up, they make the $8,020 payment to Wells Fargo to catch everything up. There it is right there. It was an auto pay.
And so taking a pause real quick, if we go back to States Exhibit 108, sorry. And you touched on this at the start when you were explaining this column, but I just want to clarify. So we're looking at September 2017, and the total there in that column is $6,220.
You add late payments and the current months to that, it got up to $8,000.
And so that's what you were describing earlier, is the reason it's an $8,000 payment is because that $6,220
is just what was past due.
Plus
then you had
then
the
the
current
current
month,
amount.
right?
All right, we can go back to States Exhibit
Okay.
86. Okay, so you see the money taken from the 401k, is that what you said?
Right.
Okay, and then deposited into the into the Onpoint account.
Right.
And then from the Onpoint account, you tracked it into payment for the mortgage.
Right.
And so again, in 86C, another example of how you're tracing the money through the various accounts that you reviewed.
Right. Right. And I think it goes without saying that deciding to take, and I believe to the best of my knowledge, that represented about 50% of Daniel's retirement 401k.
The $35,000.
Right. That alone has got to be very stressful. I mean, okay, so you are curing the Wells Fargo situation, but you're also mortgaging your retirement. You're spending your retirement. So that creates the stress of what retirement funds am I going to have, you know? So that's just it's a different kind of stress.
And so this line then that we've been talking about between September 2017 and October 2017, the change here is that the influx of the retirement account money, the $35,000, and now they are caught up on the mortgage, and it appears enter a period without any further return items or NSFs in the blue column as well.
Right, right. And I don't know what their decision process was, why they just didn't take 10 out.
So would it be
versus 35? They may have had a plan of what to do with the extra money, okay? But they did take 35 for whatever reason, and they put it, and they cured this right away. So that 35 is now 35, okay? And
can I ask, is that where the green column comes in?
yes, and actually, this is kind of an error here. The 35 actually went into here, and then when it got down to 21, they moved it over to the savings account.
And so this green column, I know you mentioned it, but just to kind of bring us back, it is a Onpoint account. It's part of the same checking account as the blue.
It's the spending, it represents the spending down of that $35,000 that they drew from the retirement. So it's a declining savings account.
So the green.
And they kind of separated it for us by putting it in that -03 account.
Okay, and that's the market savings dash -03.
Right, and what the method was as they needed money to purchase things, they would transfer from here into the checking account and then buy things, pay for things.
Okay, and
And I would say much of that went to Wells Fargo. Some of it might have gone to the Visa. It went to there were other new expenditures that arose. The expenditure level from the 35,000 on monthly went up. Some of that's explained by now they're making regular mortgage payments. Were up here, they were not. So all of a sudden, more money's come out of their bank account because they weren't spending it up above. But there are other new expenditures that came up that they were spending on, like landscaping, taxes, maid service, a couple trips, the trip to Victoria, the trip to Monterey, purchase of the ghost gun. There were some other new expenditures that happened, but expenditures increased from that point. So it was kind of their old spending habit, but more.
okay. And so just to make sure I'm understanding kind of this last piece then, what you're seeing between the green and the green column is really just tracking that $35,000 and then where it ends up by July of 2018.
Right. Basically it's on a trajectory to be totally spent.
Okay.
Okay. And the only reason I show that is they obviously are seeing this as they're spending it, right? So if they're using this to keep current here, what's going to happen when it's gone? Is it going to go back up to this? What they could have a plan, okay? But it's foreseeable that that's happening, is all I'm saying.
Okay.
That it's being spent down rather rapidly.
And the way it's being spent down, well, you've talked about the way it's being spent down, but the money is going both into the Onpoint checking at times and then into the savings, and then they're moving, like many people do, putting money in savings and then moving it into
They're drawing
checking
it from savings to their checking as they need to spend
as they need to spend it.
They weren't
Okay.
making direct expenditures out of that. They were just using it as a holding for that money to then draw on it when they, so it was kind of supplementing their ordinary income, okay? And in a healthy environment, your expenses are all paid out of your ordinary income and you keep current. You don't typically have a never-ending extra supply of savings, because then when that's gone, then the problem arises again.
And by that, do you mean like a financially, based on your experience, a financially healthy set of accounts is one where what's coming in, some may be going to savings, you're paying out of what's coming in, you're not dipping into savings or having to constantly move savings to pay your expenditures without then putting something into savings.
Correct. You should be meeting your monthly obligations out of your ordinary income, your payroll and your income.
Okay. All right. So I've sort of jumped around a bit, and I'm sorry, asking you questions. So we're now into this period, sort of post October 2017, where this $35,000 has come into the account, and you talked a little bit about the balance going down and what that green column shows. And I want to take you to a couple of exhibits just to show kind of some of what you're seeing in the records.
Right. I wanted the jury to be able to see that when I talk about these sub savings account, the transfers over to checking, how easy it is to track the balance. I've made some examples so you can see what I was looking at.
So let's look first at 86D as in David.
I think this is the one where, okay, this actually is their interest checking -09 from October into November. They were spending, it was the retirement money was in their interest checking. Then if you scroll down, it got down to about 22,000 and they stopped and they transferred 21,000 over to the -03 market savings account. So then if you keep Now, it was just a couple days later, they go, oh, we transferred too much over. I need 2,000 back. So this is the kind of the behavior when you see that balance going down. You see it says it's from 1660-03. This was already a week after they transferred the 21, 2,000 came back in to spend into the checking account. And then I think I have another example if you want to go to the next one.
Yep, and then if we look at States Exhibit 86E, and as we're moving to that, just to also clarify, I think you sort of covered this when you explained how the Onpoint account has these sort of sub accounts, but these are savings accounts that may come, many banks have these that come with your checking account. They are not like high interest
Right.
savings account. They aren't making money.
Well, this one's the market rate. It's probably, if it's like my market rate, it's less than 1%.
Yeah, it's like cents or something that you
It's
get.
not that much, but it's better
Okay.
than the no interest
All right.
savings. This is, oh,
And this is for example 86E.
yeah. This is, I think this is the wrong one.
And this is
Oh, here we go. Here we go, right there. This is the savings account. So it had starting balance, and then these are transfers back to the checking account. So I'm just showing you how it's getting spent down.
and so in the records, as you're seeing these, this is how Onpoint is sort of delineating these accounts where it says literally market rate savings account number 3.
Right,
That's how you're able to see these various accounts
right.
as you're going through.
And the master account, it all adds up to one balance. They take their checking and savings and all the various, it just adds up to one big master account. It's just kind of a way of having a savings and a checking.
Okay. And then if we look at States Exhibit 86F, is this then showing the last, what are the last sort of 3 entries in your column, the
Right,
green
I'm
column?
just showing how it continues to go down. There's more transfers out there, 41 cents in interest. Okay, and then scroll down. There's the start, and then another 1,200 and 1,001 out. And this was actually around the date of death right through here. And then if you scroll down to next month, it goes down to $400. So it's kind of all gone by then.
All right.
Transfers out.
And so if we go back to looking at States Exhibit 108, just to be clear, this green column is not, 412 is not the actual balance of Ms. Brophy's accounts. It's the balance of that $35,000 as you traced kind of where it went and how much is left.
Are you talking about this?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. And so as and you can take a seat for a bit if you want, or continue standing. As you're going through, we'll talk about some, we've sort of been ignoring the, on my sheet, it looks a little bit orange, the salmon or orange colored column.
Right, that was the next thing I wanted to talk about.
Talk about that in a second, but as you're going through this, what I'll call this second period, so post the influx of the $35,000, what are you observing about the Brophy's financial health during this period?
It's still under distress in a different way. They don't have the distress of being late or having overdrafts or being late. They're only in distress of the fact that they have borrowed from retirement, which looms, you know, and the spending down of the saving, the 35,000, the trajectory, seeing that's going away. So they have to be looking at that and thinking something's going to come to a head, or we're going to have to figure out another way to meet our obligations at that point.
And you already mentioned that during this period, you're not seeing a change in, you may be seeing some increases that we'll talk about some of those, but you're not seeing a change in expenditures,
No.
you're not seeing a reduction in.
No.
And are you seeing any other influxes of income, anything additional? You know,
No.
for example, as you're paying, you're spending the money that you borrowed, there's nothing coming in to cover that once that's gone.
No, changes in their ordinary income. I did see, this is just deposited payroll money in Daniel's Wells Fargo account where he gets Avamere and the Pioneer Pacific. I noticed in October of 2017, he had been depositing twice a month around close to $1,300 twice a month. And then all of a sudden it dropped to like 1,050. And it could be because he had something going to 401k, more deductions. I only see the net of what's going into the bank account. I don't see his gross pay.
Okay.
But he wasn't, from then on, he was depositing about $500 less a month from that month on.
Okay, so the income deposited has gone down, as that, and then with the additional
And
money that
the
they brought.
Avamere income can't be predicted. It was anywhere between a paycheck of 300 and 800. It was more likely 500 twice a month, but it was not predictable. It was.
And is it possible that that could be a variance in work hours?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
Sure.
All right, and so we've talked a lot about sort of how you're assessing financial health and all of these factors you're looking at. Turning to now the column that we haven't talked a lot about, as you're assessing financial health, what else are you also looking at?
Well, in a nutshell, could this have been avoided? Everything I saw with Wells Fargo, how are they spending their money? Did they have, in personal finance, in terms of expenditures, you have discretionary and non-discretionary expenditures. And non-discretionary are the things you need to survive. Your housing, your taxes, your debt, food, maybe to a certain extent utilities, but cable's discretionary, but heat might be non-discretionary, okay? So you look at the extras that are being spent. Another way of saying is essential or non-essential. So I was looking at their non-essential expenditures and seeing how much they were spending on that, and if they had spent it differently or decided not to buy those things, such as life insurance, such as Starbucks or restaurants or travel, could they have made their Wells Fargo payments?
All right. And so looking specifically at life insurance, what did you determine?
I have a spreadsheet of where I got my number on from what bank accounts the life insurance is being paid from.
We'll go to page 3 of State's Exhibit 108. And so is this kind of covering or explaining some of the amounts that you have listed in that orange column from the page before?
Yeah,
Okay.
this one includes a auto insurance, which I don't include on my main because I think auto insurance is a non-discretion. You need auto insurance if you're going to drive to work.
Okay.
But this kind of included all insurance that came out of the bank accounts. This was an average figure, and most of these were paid for most of the period after death. These numbers went down. And these are the accounts that they came out of. So Daniel's Wells Fargo checking account, he paid for 2 accounts. I think that was a Forrester's and a FG Life. And these came out of the account that Nancy was mostly using, the joint checking account at Onpoint. And these 2 came out of Nancy's Brophy Estrada agency account.
All right. And so looking through this, we've got almost all our life insurance payments except for the one delineated auto payment to what looks to be maybe Progressive Classic Insurance.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
Right.
Okay. And so here we can see that in green, there are 5 payments that have been highlighted. Are these payments, and we heard previously from Steve Santos that he and you had gotten together and discussed or kind of matched some of your records that you're looking at.
Right. I kept saying, no, there's more premiums. And he said, no, I'm only finding, well, the ones in the green are the ones that he identified, the policies he identified and I think testified about. And the other ones are remaining policies that came out of the bank accounts, which were likely maybe Nancy's policies.
And to be clear on that point, all of those, the 5 of those that you identified, were all continued after Mr. Brophy's
Right.
death. Is that correct? Okay, and so the green ones, that Steve Santos talked about, those payments all, stopped after Daniel Brophy's death.
Right.
All right. And then the death benefit is related to those payments, or those insurance policies that Steve Santos already testified in that column.
Correct.
Is
I
that
got
right?
that from him.
All right. And so it looks like in total, at least is this a snapshot of just 1 month? Is that what we're
Yes,
seeing here?
yes, but I actually, if you bear with me,
Actually, while he's taking a look for that, it seems like a good time to take our afternoon break.
okay.
Why don't we go in recess and be back on the record at 4? All right, please be seated. I just wanted to ask the parties one logistics question before we bring in the jury. This is, as I understand it, the state's last witness, and we may or may not get through with the witness today. But I guess what I wanted to ask defense is we're going to stop by 5 no matter what, because the jury has concerns going past 5. But for defense, I know there's been concerns in the past about getting into a room I thought to get clothes ready for the next day. I guess my question to you all is, if it looks like we can go to 5 and we won't have to have trial tomorrow, is that preferable or not? I'm not entirely sure what the room situation is, so I just wanted to see if I could get some clarity on that.
Well, unlike a prior day, we did actually remember to get the car keys today. So I think we can make it work. Certainly, if Ms. Brophy's going to need clothes tomorrow, both because of the transport situation and getting her dressed, it's much preferable to break earlier. But
sure, absolutely. So I guess what I'll have to do is about 4:40, 4:45, see where we are. Looks like whether or not we'll be ending by 5, and if not, we'll stop and go from there. Okay, let's bring the jury in then. And I want to say, I'm not trying to put any limitations on how long either side goes. If we go tomorrow, that's fine. I just asking the question.
Okay, we will go off record. I will put us on mute and get the jury.
All right, everyone can be seated. And Ms. Herman, when you're ready.
And Mr. Azar, I think right before we broke, I was asking you if this, page 3 of State's Exhibit 108, is a snapshot of an average month or of a particular month, or how you kind of used this
There's about 15 months in a row where this is the same thing, so it's a really good average.
All right.
And I just wanted to point out that this is where it came from. I did the whole time period. So not all of, this section here in the middle is about all the same. It's all this. Very early on, sometimes it was more, sometimes it was less, and I'd be happy to share this if you'd like to see it.
I see. All right. And so when we go, well, let me talk about this before we go back. So when we go back to that other page 2, then that's kind of where you're getting this as an average because it's the most common.
Yeah, my page 2, the other one.
Yeah. So if we go back to page 2 in this column, then
this excludes automobile insurance. So this is actually, these are the actual amounts then. The one that I just reflected as an average were like these numbers right here. I just showed that as an average because I was told that I think the defense wanted to know what bank accounts premiums came out of. So I tried to show which bank accounts were paying for these.
all right. And so if we're looking at page 3 again, then this number at the bottom, so the total amount of insurance payments being paid through all of these accounts is $1,412.45 a month.
Right, including automobile.
Including automobile insurance. And so then what you've done is taken this snapshot of 1 month on page 3 and then put it back into the orange column on page 2, but minus the auto insurance.
Right, because they need to pay auto insurance. It's not an option.
And so what the orange column is showing is what you're referring it to as discretionary payments specifically to life insurance.
Right, what I was trying to show is life insurance as a non-essential expense is something the reason I chose the life insurance payments is by far the single largest category of payment. It's like I didn't like say I'm gonna pick Starbucks, or I'm gonna pick Fred Meyer, or I'm gonna pick going to Century Theaters or whatever. This was the single largest category of discretionary spending that could make a huge impact on their monthly budget. So the idea being, should they stop paying for the life insurance until they got back on their feet? It very came close to what the monthly mortgage payment would be. They'd need an extra $200 or $300. And so if they had not have been paying this, there's every indication that these could have all been paid.
And so when we're looking at this, the numbers in this orange column, that is the amount per month that the Brophy spent on life insurance every month.
Correct.
And so the months, which is the majority of them, that they're spending $1,253.80, their mortgage payment at that time is around $1,550. Is that right?
Correct.
All right. And that's what you mean by it's about $300. If you eliminated the insurance payments and then took $300 from somewhere else, that entire orange column would be paying for their mortgage.
Right. And I did do some analysis on other discretionary spending, like fast food and restaurants was about $300 a month. Sometimes it would go up, sometimes it might be $250. And there were other retail spending, going to Michael's, other discretionary expenditures that could have easily been cut
And
to meet their mortgage obligation.
And so that's kind of what you're looking through as you go through any account, anyone's accounts. You're looking at what discretionary income, what are they paying, what categories of things are they paying the most on, what could be eliminated.
Right.
And you specifically looked at life insurance because it is the highest amount of discretionary money that's being spent per month.
Yes.
That could be eliminated in some capacity.
Yes.
Or reduced.
Right.
Okay. All right. And okay. And then again, what this chart doesn't show, just kind of to cover one last time, if we go back to page 3, is that that chart we just looked at does not include the car insurance for $158 a month.
Correct.
All right. And you can have a seat. In addition to going through what we've been talking about in this chart in States Exhibit 108, did you also look at a couple specific transactions or look to find a couple of specific transactions that you were asked to locate?
Yes, I was.
Okay, that was a
I did.
poorly worded question, but all right. I want to look. So, in other words, detectives asked you to look for specific time periods and/or specific transactions. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay, I want to look first at State's Exhibit, and I'm missing my own Exhibit G. 86G, excuse me. Oh, thank you. All right, and so what are we, this appears to be an on-point statement.
Correct. This is the interest checking, the -09, the most used portion of that account. On December 26th, there's a debit card purchase for ghostguns.com for $676.99.
All right, and I know we can see it here, but it says date is December 26th, but what is important to note about the actual transaction date?
Well, in this case, they put like December 24th as the date of purchase, but the date that it went through the account was the 26th.
All right, and that's where you can see it in the sort of second line item there.
Right here.
And that's pretty common
So
with
this
it.
is when it went through. That's very common for there to be a lag on those, and PayPal and all of those. It could be a lag 2 or 3 days, maybe longer.
All right. And that's a purchase for, you said, $676.99.
Correct.
All right. And then looking at State's Exhibit 86H.
In this particular case, I was actually asked to look for a PayPal transaction in the amount of $364.99, which I was told was associated with the Colt barrel purchase. This particular transaction does not, like the other one, it doesn't show the original date that the eBay purchase was made. It came through the account on February 26th, a PayPal purchase of $364.99, which matches exactly.
And in this one, it's not quite as clear as the last line, but it has what it reads as 180224, but is that really actually February 24th of 2018?
Yeah, it could be.
All right. And this is that same on-point checking account.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then looking at State's Exhibit 86I, what are you looking for in this date range?
Well, I was told that on a possibility on February 17th that a gun was purchased, and it may have been purchased with cash. So I just went to look to see if there was any withdrawals near that date, on that date or near it. And I found the previous date, there was a $400 withdrawal.
And it looks like here there's actually two withdrawals on that date, the $400 from Onpoint, and then before that, it says withdrawal at a Fred Meyer. Are you able to tell what exactly that means?
I can't tell if part of that is less cash or just a purchase. So it could be a combination thereof. It could have been mostly cash. I don't know.
All right.
Yeah, but that was the same date, correct?
Okay, and this is very clearly February 16th. It's not a delayed report.
Right.
All right. Okay, and so you looked for those things, and we've talked a lot about State's Exhibit 108, and sort of, again, part of what you did to create this chart on page 2 of State's Exhibit 108 in particular is looking at the overall financial health. As you look at this, what is your assessment? And in totality, we've talked about sort of the two different time periods, but in totality, what is your opinion of the financial health of the Brophies and of these accounts?
I think I'd call it precarious. It's pretty obvious. It's more overt up till October 2017, because you can see from the statement on Wells Fargo how far they're falling behind on their expenditures. It becomes nuanced after that because it's in the form of borrowing from retirement funds, which is difficult on its own because your retirement funds are supposed to be for retirement. So that's stressful, but then when you go through it, as you can see a trend towards it being completely spent, you can see that there's gonna be another issue coming up.
And in other words, if you just look at, like, for example, the mortgage column, it would appear that with the exception of May 2018 and then one payment after Dan Brophy's death, July 2018, with those being late payments to the mortgage, those 2 months, that everything else is being paid. So it would appear if you just looked at that column, like things are
Right.
going well.
It is being paid, but it's being paid from retirement funds.
And that is what's illustrated in the green column then,
Right.
that you're seeing as that dwindles. What is going to happen?
Exactly. Well, what's going to happen is there's a point where they'll have to live off of their ordinary income, or they'll have to figure out a situation where they can lower their expenses, or a combination thereof.
At the point that it's at, if they don't change their expenses, if they don't borrow additional money from another source.
I mean, if they stayed status quo with everything, they would return, it looks like they would return to 2017 finances where they're in trouble again.
Back at the top of
Right.
sort of this graph where things are delinquent and there's no money coming
Correct.
to cover the
Correct.
expenses. Thank you. That's all the questions I have.
Thank you, Your Honor. Is it Azor or Azor?
Azor.
All right. So, Mr. Azor, wouldn't it make perfect sense for a couple in this position to start thinking about selling their house to
Sure.
downsize?
Sure.
Did you figure out what the equity they had in that house was?
No, I figured I did not actually figure that into what they've gone through historically. I think their mortgage was about $250,000 balance, and the house was probably worth about $600,000 or so. So there's probably about $350,000 in equity.
And you're not taking into account there whether maybe they'd be able to divide this oversized lot they were living on?
Sure, yeah.
All right. And if they were thinking about perhaps moving out into a slightly more rural area, getting a little bit further out of town, isn't it conceivable that that money would go quite a bit further than it would in that part of Beaverton?
It depends on what their plans were.
Sure.
This is a weird financial time, and that rentals can be more expensive monthly than purchases. And it depends on what the market is, whether they were gonna rent or whether they were gonna buy, and whether they were gonna take out another mortgage. It's all the factors of their decision.
Absolutely. That's a complicated decision, isn't it?
Sure.
And it would make sense for them to continue to debate that and think about that and really settle on a good plan that would make them both happy, but was realistic, correct? Now when did you actually develop States Exhibit 108, the one that we've been talking about here?
I've done probably about 15 iterations of that. Just because, like, the first time I did it, I included auto insurance because I didn't know Horace Mann was not life insurance. I found out later Horace Mann was auto insurance. So I adjusted the numbers as my knowledge of all these names and these accounts grew. I also found out that, for instance, Onpoint statements and, like, say, July 10th would be their July statement. Well, most of that activity is actually in June. So their July statement, if I'm gonna match it with Wells Fargo, needs to be adjusted. So I did adjusting over time. So my earlier iterations were off and I got more accurate as I went along.
Okay, well, I think you just answered one of the questions I was going to ask you, but let's back up just a little bit. So I don't think we have all 15 iterations. I think we've got one prior to the
The
ones.
iterations are my work product.
Sure,
So,
sure.
I try not to put,
Let her finish the question.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Your Honor. All right, so 108 in its current form, when did you actually finish that one?
2 weeks ago, a week ago, because I kept adding to it as time went. I
Okay.
wanted to add the footnote, for instance, that the monthly past due does not include, so I was preparing for trial, so I was getting everything accurate. I was double checking numbers. I was going back and making sure they were all correct.
Okay, so this final version that we're looking at now was actually developed after the trial had begun. The
Yes.
final version was.
Sure,
Okay.
yes.
Okay. Mr. Breton, would you pull up Defendant's Exhibit 257, please? Now, you may have already answered this in response to a question from Ms. Herman, but how long was it after this investigation began that you started working on the case?
After the investigation began, boy, that's a long time ago.
Right. What do you think your earliest involvement in this case was? Just date range. You don't
Fall
have to
of
give me a
20,
specific
A
date.
couple months after this, when they started getting the bank records is normally when they would come to me. So however long that took, I don't think I could tell you an exact month,
Okay.
but it was when they came to me and asked me to look at the bank records.
Okay, and I didn't hear you put any date on that, even a range. Maybe you said it and
I
we
said
talked over each other.
several months after the date of death, when Detective Merrill got the bank records. So I'm gonna guess it would be like the fall of 2018.
So probably a good 3 years ago, a little bit more?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. When in that process do you think you developed this version of what's now State's Exhibit 108?
Probably right away.
This is one of your early ones?
What? Yeah, very early. I can just tell because there's so many things not on it, and there's things on it that didn't really matter. The landscaping, I didn't think that was worth tracking.
Well,
was worth-
that's what I want to ask you about, and I was glad to find that you had tracked it in this. Who is James Denney?
Well, my understanding, because I Googled him, is that he's a landscaper.
Okay.
Okay, so, yeah.
Okay. Did you talk to the detectives about who he is, what his role is in all this?
I believe they already were, I told them that there was a lot of checks going to a James Denney,
Uh-huh.
so I don't know what they did with that.
Okay, but you didn't get information back beyond what you did to Google him
Nah.
yourself? Okay.
No, I was just following the numbers.
Okay, but on this version, this early version of your chart, he actually gets his own column.
Because it was so, when you're doing a finance, that stuck out because it was so much money.
Sure, it is. And those payments actually start after that Alaris deposit, don't they?
Yes, yes, they do.
Not long after it, they take out the, well, technically, Mr. Brophy takes out the loan against his retirement account. I'll just say they did, and it goes into their joint account, and that happens in about October.
Mm-hmm.
And then
October 1st, yeah.
in December, there's a payment to Mr. Denney already, a fairly substantial payment.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, you had mentioned when you were looking through State's Exhibit 86D, and just so we can keep that up, I can give you a paper copy of that. I don't know. He isn't David.
Yeah,
86D.
the transfer of $2,000 back after the,
Exactly.
yes. Uh-huh.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So you were commenting that they had moved some of that money. They tried to squirrel it away, leave it in savings, but they almost immediately had to take
Well, they
$2,000
probably
back
just
out of
decided,
it.
whoops, we transferred too much and transferred back. If they had an obligation, that's probably what they would do.
Okay, and the date of that transfer back of that $2,000 is 11/29 of 2017. Do you want me to hand you this
Yeah,
again?
sure, I'll read the date.
Okay. Sorry, I should have left it.
That's
a little bit
okay.
Longer.
Yes, 11/29 of 17.
Okay,
Yep.
and on this early version of what's now States 108,
Mm-hmm.
you show the first payment to James Denney actually occurring sometime in December of 2017. It's on here as 2107, but I'm sure you meant 2017.
Right, typo. that's another thing I cleaned up.
Okay, so we've got the $2,000 transfer on 11/29 of 2017, and then sometime in December, we've got a payment of just under $2,000 to Mr. Denney.
Okay.
Okay. But your information about Mr. Denney and his role in all of this and how money was being expended really was just limited to being able to Google him?
My information regarding Mr. Denney?
Right.
Yes.
The purpose of that, okay.
Yeah.
But you do know that he's a landscaper.
According to Google.
Okay, that's true. We can't entirely rely on that, but I think we'll be hearing from him. So you also talked about there being a drop in the deposits that were going into the account that Mr. Brophy was using essentially on his own. That wasn't a joint account, the Wells
The
Fargo.
Wells Fargo, yes.
Sure. And were his paychecks from the company that oversees OCI, that owns it, were those getting direct deposited into that account?
I think those were checks,
Okay.
but there was no like stub that shows all the gross pay, net pay, the deductions and all that. I think it was just a check. And I may even have some with me.
Okay, to ascertain that, were you working off of financial records in addition to the bank records, or were you trying to just suss out what was actually getting deposited into Wells Fargo?
I actually went through every single deposit and hand scheduled it old school, just to make sure there wasn't any. I wanted to see how often he was getting his bank check. It was every 2 weeks. And I wanted to check Avamere when that started. And then I wanted to see if it was consistent during the time period. So I scheduled it all the way through. And right around October 2017, it went down. The one from Pioneer Pacific went down quite a bit. I don't know why, but it just did. And that's the money that was deposited to the account went down. I think it equated to about 500 less per month.
Okay, all right. And I think you've pretty much answered this, although you might be able to answer it a little bit more directly. You were looking to the Wells Fargo checking account
Right.
records to ascertain that. You didn't have other financial records
No.
like the records that would have come directly from the school or tax?
No W-2s, no tax forms, nothing. I was just looking at the payroll that was the net pay that was going into his account.
Okay, all right. I'd like to, now, did you have access to the full records from that retirement account?
No, I had a stack of records, but it was not my, I was not reviewing the life insurance records because I'm not a life insurance expert. The only reason
Maybe I misspoke, but I'm trying to ask you about the retirement account.
Oh, the retirement
Not
account?
a life insurance
No,
account.
I don't have access to the retirement account. I had no records for that. The only record I had for that was the dispersal from Aluris. And then the second, I have a copy of the check from the second dispersal along with like a letter explaining the dispersal from Aluris.
Okay, and Alaris, were you able to identify that as the retirement account of Mr. Brophy's that he was earning as a result of his work at OCI?
Yeah, it mentioned that in the letter.
Okay, all right. Before or I keep wanting to say they, but technically that's his account. Before he took out that loan in the fall of 2017, do you know what the balance of his retirement account from OCI was?
No, I inferred a estimated balance based upon the loan and the ending dispersal. I know he paid a little bit of that loan back, but the original loan back, but he would have gotten the rest of it, or Nancy would have got the rest of it in September of 2018 when she got the rest of the funds.
Okay, and I'm not sure that you've actually testified about this, so let me just clarify this to make sure everybody's following us. There are two dispersals. There's the one we've talked about quite a bit that happens in the fall of 2017.
Right.
And that's for $35,000?
Correct.
And that, for the most part, goes into their joint Onpoint checking account.
Mm-hmm.
But that you identify that as an account that primarily Mrs. Brophy used.
Mm-hmm.
And then Mr. Brophy's other income, his regular income from OCI is going into that Wells Fargo account,
Correct.
correct?
Yep.
Okay. All right, so now you're talking about a second transaction that has to do with the OCI retirement account of Mr. Brophy's.
Right.
That's the one I'm not sure we've actually explained to anybody yet. So can you explain what that is?
I can explain what I saw. What I observed was a 34,000 and change check from Aluris. I think it was payable to Nancy. I assumed it was a death benefit of the 401k. Based upon the letter, it was being cashed out. She deposited it into the Brophy Estrada account, and then very shortly transferred an 18,000 and a 15,000 over to the other Onpoint account. So it was
Okay, so let's keep it simple now that
Okay.
I'm just asking you about the retirement
Sorry.
account. So there's the $35,000 withdrawal in the fall of 2017, and then after Mr. Brophy dies, that account is
in
essentially
September
closed
of
out.
2018, I believe.
Okay, the court reporter is not gonna like us talking over each
Sorry.
other. It might have been my fault, I'm not blaming you. But that, after Mr. Brophy dies, that account is essentially closed out, correct?
I believe so.
Okay, and I think you just gave the answer to the time frame. That was maybe a year after the first amount was taken out. That was sometime in the fall of 2018.
Correct.
Okay, let me show you what's been marked here as Exhibit 259. That references what you're talking about now.
Correct.
All right, and what does that show the balance of that loan was, the 35,000 loan that had been taken out?
If it's the loan default amount, it's 30,684.
Okay, and wouldn't you expect that to be the same?
As the 35?
No, wouldn't you expect this figure on this document to be the balance, outstanding balance of that loan?
Yes, if it's vernacular that they use, is all I'm saying.
Okay,
It doesn't say loan balance or anything like that. It just uses a different term.
okay, and what this shows is that the amount that was still outstanding of that loan
Mhm.
at the time the account was closed was 30,000, not 35,000.
Almost 31, but yes, yeah, correct.
Yeah, 30,684.
Hmm.
Okay, and what you had seen in the bank records of the deposits from OCI that were going into Mr. Brophy's account,
Hmm.
after that $35,000 loan was taken out in the fall of 2017,
Hmm.
almost simultaneously, very shortly after,
Sure,
there's a
exactly.
drop in the
Mhm.
deposits.
Hmm.
And you estimated that was about 500 a month.
Right?
And that would have been about 10 months before his death,
Sure.
not quite 10 months.
Hmm.
Okay, so would it make sense that he was paying that back at a rate of about
That's-
500 a month?
That's very plausible. The problem is I don't have the records, but that makes sense. Yes.
Sure.
Sure.
Okay, what other signs did you see that the Brophies were paying down their debt?
Daniel was making payments on his Visa, 800 to 1,000 a month. So that went down, like I said, to 3,500. So that was signs that that was being paid down. And the other sign was just that they kept current with their home loan.
Okay, so let me show you what's been marked as Defendant's Exhibit 258. Mr. Brett, maybe you could bring that up as well. If it's on your screen there. Okay, good, got it set up. On that statement, that's a Bank of America credit card statement.
Mm-hmm.
Is that one of the accounts that you were able to review?
Yes.
Okay. And that is an account statement for the period ending May 19th of 2018.
Yes.
Okay, and that, at least at that point, which of course is about 2 weeks or so before he dies, the balance on that credit card is down to $3,160.
Right.
And it may be based on your testimony.
It goes up a little bit the next month.
There might have
yeah.
been a
I
couple
looked
of
at every month.
charges.
Yeah.
Okay. What had that balance been, let's say, a year before? How much had been paid
11,000.
down?
11,000. Well, it was at 11,000 June of 2016, and it stayed up there for several months. I can't tell you exactly when it started going down.
Okay, but
But I know that the problem is they were making like an $800 payment, but they might charge 400 on it, or $1,000 payment and they might charge 300. So it wasn't going down as fast as the payments that were hitting it. But then they stopped at some point basically charging to it, and then it really started going down.
okay, so they were making good progress
Yes,
on that.
they were.
Had that close to paid off.
hmm
And on that statement that's there in front of you, what does that show as the credit that was available on that date about 2 weeks before he passed?
$12,839.29.
Now, obviously, if they're working hard to get that paid down, they don't want to tap back into that, but what did they have as cash on hand, right? I realize it's a little difficult because he passed on June 2nd and most of these statements end on May 31st,
Right.
but looking at those days just right surrounding his death, what was their cash on hand?
I don't have a calculation for that.
Okay, well, Mr. Breton, would you pull up?
I
Let's
think
start.
I know that on the Onpoint account, they might have had around 7,000 in the checking, 7 to 5. I'd have to do a calculation. I'd have to look at that. That's
Well,
not.
I'll admit I had my calculator out while you were testifying. I'm happy to loan it to you. But on the Onpoint account is the one that you indicated had the 4 sub-accounts.
Correct.
So we'd have to add up all 4 of those
Well,
balances.
-01, I think regular checking, I don't think was ever used, or regular savings. -08,
Well,
which was regular.
but we'd have to add up those
Yes, we
4
would have to add all
balances to
4.
figure out what was available in that
Sure.
Onpoint account, correct?
Mhm.
Mr. Breton, would you pull up let's see, I think that's 251, defense 251. Maybe scoot that up a little bit so we can see, yeah, those 4 sub-accounts right there and then right under.
Yeah, so it's about
account
7
summary.
grand, right? 7,400.
Okay, yeah, when I added that up, I got 75, 79,
Right.
91. Does that
Mhm.
sound like it's in the ballpark?
It looks right.
And that statement ended, that period of that statement was 5/9 to 6/8 of 2018.
Correct.
So that ends just a few days after he passes.
hmm
Okay. Let's go back to Bank of America. And what was this account, the Bank of America? I think you identified that as one that,
The Odonata account, Odonata Food Consulting.
okay. And you said you didn't have a chance to look through the tax returns. You don't know whether that was in their cumulative income that they were reporting?
I don't think I had access to the tax returns, so no.
Okay. All right, so on that account, did you pull up Exhibit 250, Mr. Breton, please? What does that show, the ending balance, May 31st of 2018?
$2,118.59.
Okay, and then we should go back to Wells Fargo, the checking account that you described as the one that Mr. Brophy was owned on his own and used primarily. That's Exhibit 252, Mr. Breton, if you could. Right up at the very top where it says Activity Summary, what does that show as the May 31st, 2018 balance?
I can't quite, is that 986? It's kind of blurry for me,
That's the way I'm reading it, but I agree it's blurry.
0.53.
I think, Mr. Breton, if you could go down to the second page, it's actually a little bit more distinct. But right in the middle of the second page, right above that big heavy line.
Oh, there it is, yeah.
I think you got it right.
Okay.
Okay. So those 3 figures together add up to over $10,000, don't they?
Yep,
And when I added them, I got 10,685.03. Does that look like that's about right to you?
I'm gonna have to trust you with that.
Okay, but it's over, you know that it's over 10,000,
Right.
just doing the math in your head. Okay, so they've got credit available of over 12,000, almost 13,000, and then cash available of over 10,000, perhaps 10.6.
Mhm.
And I think you've answered this already because you said you did not have access to their tax returns. Did you ask for their tax returns as part of trying to do this?
No, I didn't.
Okay. Normally, if you were trying to assess somebody's financial health, is that something that you would want to see?
Like if I was, when I did loans at the bank, yes, I'd want to see the tax returns. Yeah.
Sure, and it sounds like your background before you got into this, I know you're not sworn law enforcement,
Yeah.
but into a law enforcement role, your background was doing net worth analysis. So you have a pretty good grounding in how to look at the big picture of the health of a household and health of a family. Why didn't you ask for their tax returns?
I just assumed they weren't available. I assumed they would have been given to me.
Okay.
I think at one point I did ask for, was there any loan applications? Because sometimes you can glean information on assets. People declare all their income and I don't think they had a loan application. That's another source of, stated wealth.
Okay, so I'm not sure exactly how this works within the Bureau. Do you have access to the complete investigative file?
No,
Do you have access to all the discovery?
I don't think so.
And do you know what I mean when I use the term discovery? I know that's kind of a term of art.
I don't know if I have access to it. I don't think I've received any discovery information. That's a prosecutorial thing.
Sure, so really what you were working with was the bank statements.
That's it.
Okay. Okay, so you'd mentioned a bank statement, and I think this came in your discussion of the insurance, the premiums being paid to a Brophy Estrada account.
Premiums? What?
No, I think you brought this up both in the context of talking about the bank statements and then also in this context of talking about the insurance premiums that were being paid, that you found a Brophy Estrada account?
Yes, there's the Onpoint, Brophy Estrada, Susan Estrada and Nancy had a joint account called the Brophy Estrada Agency, I think it was. Is that what you're referring to?
Did that appear to be a business account?
At first, it appeared to be maybe insurance related because it looked like some insurance commission payments came in. But later on, there was hardly any activity. There was not a lot of activity in it, not a lot of ongoing. It was like it was a stale or just plain not being used after a while. There was very, very little activity on it.
Okay.
Pursuant to our earlier discussion about logistics, it's now 4:45. So unless you tell me otherwise, I think that we would end for the day and start up again tomorrow, but I don't know how much longer Cross might be.
Your Honor, I can certainly finish by 5. I'm a little bit concerned, though, about the fact that there would be some redirect, and I know there's some jurors who really don't want to have
Right.
this
I have the same concerns, so I think why don't we break for today and we'll start up again at 9 o'clock tomorrow.